Hi, Dr. Amber. Welcome to the Genetic Genius podcast. I'm so excited to have you as a guest today. How are you?
Yes, thank you for having me on. I'm doing wonderful. Just starting the week and have some patients labs this week. So excited to talk about women's health.
Yeah, I know it's going to be so great. Before we dive into some of our exciting topics in regards to women's health, can you just talk about yourself to the listeners, who you are, what you do, and your impact in California, where you are?
Yeah, so I'm in Los Angeles and I'm a naturopathic doctor, which means I'm trained to treat the whole person and approach medicine with supporting the body to do better at what it knows how to do, but maybe forgot or got confused versus suppressing the body. And so I work with a lot of women on hormones, and I do a lot of hormone testing, run the Dutch test, and I also specialize in peptide therapy. So peptides are kind of a novel being used in medicine for women's health, but also for other health complaints like IBD and some GI conditions. So we can talk more about that. But my specialty is women's hormones, helping women cope with stress, looking at what's going on there, and then using peptide therapy as well.
Oh, great. That sounds so exciting. I can't wait to learn more about peptide therapy myself. I don't know a lot about it, and I'm sure our listeners will be excited as well. And where did you grow up? Did you grow up in California?
No, I actually grew up in Minnesota.
Oh, nice. Yeah, my husband's family is from there. I've never been there, but I look forward to visiting. I've heard it's so beautiful.
It is really beautiful. The winters are brutal.
Yeah, totally. Ice fishing, right? That's a big one.
Ice fishing, ice skating. We have a lot of lakes, a lot of water that freezes over in the winter.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Oh, good. Well, let's get started and talk about women's health today. But first, I wanted to talk about how the body relates from that cellular perspective to mitochondria. And then let's talk about how we'll dive deeper into how mitochondria affects the hormones from that cellular perspective. Does that sound good?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was kind of a revelation to me when I started practicing medicine and working with a lot of women with hormones. I didn't really know much, or I didn't really consider the mitochondrial component. And I was trained by A4M in peptide therapy, and that's where we really explored what's going on at the cell level when hormone synthesis is compromised, what's happening there. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's a lot of revelations that happened for me in practicing and understanding, our hormones are actually made in the mitochondria. Cortisol,
Mm-hmm.
progesterone, which is that calming hormone for the central nervous system. And so, a lot of times as a naturopathic doctor, women will come into me perimenopausal, having hot flashes and symptoms. And the first thing that we do typically for women is sometimes we'll give them a bioidentical hormone. We'll give
Mm-hmm.
them, some of the cofactors, some of the things to make those hormones. Evening primrose oil, it depends on the age of the woman, but kind of this missing puzzle piece is helping support the mitochondria so that the woman's natural production of hormones is supported.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's very much a lens that I use in working with women now, is using more mitochondrial support. And commonly, you and I have probably both seen this in women. One of the most common complaints is fatigue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just feeling tired all the time. I hear that from 80-90% of women that I see.
I know, it's amazing, right? Why are we so tired? So what's the function of the mitochondria? So you said they're in the cell. So for our listeners, what's a mitochondria? Like, it's more of a common word, I think, now in maybe, in the streams of life. But like, where is it in this? It's an organelle, correct, inside the cell. And then, like, what's the function of it, and why is it important? And why did we have less of them in the cell?
Yes. Okay. So think about the cell, and the best analogy that I give is I'm living in LA right now. So we have a big power plant here that powers the whole city.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about this in 8th grade biology, that the mitochondria is really the powerhouse of the cell. So it fuels all the activities. There's also DNA in the mitochondria, which can be
Mm-hmm.
damaged by oxidative stress. But what would happen, if LA is the cell and the power plant is the mitochondria, if the power plant in LA quits working right now, we can't run our Wi-Fi. I can't charge my laptop, phone. We can't run the dishwasher. Everything shuts down essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And so really, the same thing happens in a cell. If the mitochondria are running subpar or very inefficiently, which does happen with age, it happens with environmental exposures, with chronic stress. It can really wear on those mitochondria. We know that things like NSAIDs are mitochondrial toxic. Alcohol is mitochondrial toxic. There's a lot of pharmaceutical medications we give to someone who is in chronic pain or fatigue, and a lot of times it'll actually create more subpar or less efficient mitochondrial function as a
Mm-hmm.
result.
Mm-hmm.
And so supporting the mitochondria, thinking about how that plays a role in protecting DNA, how that plays a role in how we age, in our energy levels, since fatigue is a big one for women, and then our hormone production for women. So looking at healthy cortisol levels, progesterone, all of those hormones. So yeah, the mitochondria, I think, are really coming to light for all of the diseases, the disease states that are associated with what's happening at the cell level. When the mitochondria, aren't working as effectively, we notice brain fog and
Mm-hmm.
muscle and just lethargic all the time, no motivation to move and work out. And a lot of the pieces in research that we've connected the dots is between autism and what's happening in the mitochondria, between this neurocognitive decline and what's happening in the mitochondria. And then for women and hormones, I think that link really hasn't been talked about as much, but it's so important to talk about what's going on in the mitochondria and how that can support a woman in producing those hormones naturally.
Yeah, that's so key. I love the way you had that analogy of LA and then powerhouse, because it's true, our mitochondria, they are the powerhouse of the cell. And without, it's not, we just don't have one. People always think like, oh, well, I just have this like, well, I have one that would be a really actually poor functioning cell, right? We want to have lots of mitochondria. So they actually like work together in this synergistic relationship to provide energy throughout the whole body, right? And so you were talking about the DNA of the mitochondria, and let's dive deeper into from that hormonal perspective, because I think that part is so fascinating. So you were saying that the mitochondria and the cell then help to make the hormones, and is it from a kind of like a neurotransmitter perspective, like a message that the mitochondria then give out to the other cells?
Yeah. So the mitochondria are interesting because there's crosstalk happening all the time. So the mitochondria is constantly talking to the nucleus of the cell, which is where we also have DNA.
Mm-hmm.
The mitochondria also have a lot of crosstalk or communication 24/7 with our gut microbiome.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that plays a role in immunity and our antiviral, antibacterial response. And then, the other piece is that mitochondria are really signaled by certain things like light and temperature.
Mm.
And so we can use as simple of strategies. There's lifestyle strategies that we can use to help boost mitochondrial function
Mm-hmm.
without having to even take anything, supplement, medication, any sort of thing. So, for example, we know that blue light spectrums
Mm-hmm.
can burn out the pineal gland, which is
Right.
that in the brain that makes
The
melatonin.
computer.
Right? So that really important gland in the brain helps us make melatonin. Melatonin is that amazing anti-inflammatory, regulates our immune system. And melatonin is one of the number one protective things for our mitochondria. So don't suppress that. So we know that blue light suppresses melatonin, constant exposure through computer screens all day long, which is kind of the reality of modern day living.
Right.
Many of us, can impact that production of melatonin. And so we can use red light therapy, and we can kind of modulate our exposure as much as possible to screens, to blue light exposure all day long. So blue light blockers, I recommend that my women use those at night, using the Flux app on your Mac or your phone to dim the screen so that we're not getting that blue light, especially at night. And then using something like a red light. So I have a red light sitting behind me that has those healing spectrums that actually will awaken the mitochondria to produce more ATP and fatigue over time, helping what's happening in the cell to work more effectively. So that's one of the light impacts at cold. Cryotherapy is such a big thing now.
Ice baths.
Ice baths, yeah. That's and ancient medicine, a lot of naturopathic doctors were using cold and heat for many years, and maybe didn't know exactly what was happening in the mitochondria, but we know that little bit of stressor, getting exposure to cold, can really help the mitochondria to upregulate and produce ATP, produce energy effectively. And then, for a lot of my women, you were asking about signaling that happens in the mitochondria. So, pregnenolone is that mama hormone that turns into everything else. And essentially, pregnenolone will enter into the mitochondria and goes through that process of turning into cortisol or progesterone or estrogen, all of those hormones.
Right,
and
depending
so
on the need.
on the need, yeah. And then we also can have that pregnenolone steal, where we'll steal it away to make cortisol for release stress. So yeah, it's really paramount thinking about the stress response and how so many women are under a load of stress, and we see a lot of changes in hormones after a period of chronic stress. And I have a really good analogy for a lot of the women that I work with, and it's that our hormones are kind of like a 3-tiered stool. So we have our adrenal hormones, so where our cortisol is, our adrenals right above our kidneys on both sides of the body. We have our thyroid hormones, which is the butterfly gland that regulates metabolism, and then we have all of our sex hormones, so estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. And so, when a woman goes through a period of chronic stress and her adrenal glands kind of fall out, one leg of the stool falls out, it usually impacts the other hormones as well.
Yeah, that's such a great analogy, and it's so true. You can't really balance on a 2-legged stool very well.
Right.
Yeah. And, as you were saying too, stress is such a big impact on the hormonal aspect and of the mitochondria, which I think is one of the reasons, like you're saying, why people experience so much more fatigue. It's but going back to that root cause, I think a lot of people don't, understand, because it is a complicated system. Simple but complicated, right? And then when we're talking about the mitochondria, like they have such a huge impact on the whole energetic body. And especially when we're talking about replication of a cell, we don't want a cell that has poor functioning mitochondria to then replicate and have more and more cells with poor functioning mitochondria. That's a bad scene, right?
Yes. Yeah. And there's those 2 processes in the mitochondria. So we have like autophagy, we have mitophagy, which is what's happening when we're sleeping, to get rid of or recycle the old mitochondria. And then we have mitochondrial biogenesis, which is just the production of new mitochondria. And so we want to stimulate new mitochondria. Great ways to do that are free is exercise.
Free exercise, yay!
And then there's lots of like PQQ is an amazing molecule that actually supports mitochondrial biogenesis. So new We can use red light, we can use cold to really stimulate those processes. So yeah, the cortisol piece is interesting too, because you look at, if the cortisol is made in the mitochondria, and as women, if we're busy mothers or run a business, an online business, and have all of these things kind of pulling at our attention, using coffee as a stimulus, I know that med school was that for me. And then kind of looking at robbing Peter to pay Paul. So taking tomorrow's cortisol for today, a lot of times. And what that can do is also, if the mitochondria are taxed from things in our environment, a lot of alcohol consumption, a lot of medications, pain relievers, any sort of environmental exposure, they're less effective at producing cortisol. So it's almost like when we're constantly drinking coffee, we're telling our body make more cortisol, but that's made in the mitochondria, and the mitochondria aren't working well. We have issues in actually producing the proper amount. And so looking at what's happening there as a way to support mitochondria, support cortisol production in a healthy way to support energy levels.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I love that, and talking about the cortisol. So how does cortisol, oh, I think there's a feedback. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Weird internet going in and out here. Oh, sorry. So in regards to the cortisol, how does that increase from that stress perspective for our listeners? So, and how do they know how would they, feel if they were having an increase in their cortisol levels?
Yeah, great question. So when we experience a stressor, and that can be a current experience that we're in, where we're being confronted, or maybe somebody calls us and it's an unpleasant phone call, whatever that may be, or a situation from the past that our mind recalls, we can secrete cortisol in both of those instances. A mere thought can do it. And what that does is it's, triggers the brain to release certain chemicals from the pituitary that speak to our adrenal glands. There's this kind of communication that's happening. And then our adrenal glands will say, hey, we need to output more cortisol in response to this threat, this stressful experience. And it could be a thought from the past. It triggers that. And then, that cortisol is made. It's made in the adrenal glands, but it's actually made in the mitochondria in the cells of the adrenal glands.
super tiny. We're going like that the show where you take the little camera and go in the body. We're doing that now.
Microscopic zoom in. Right?
Yep, totally.
And then we start outputting cortisol, and that can be a rob Peter to pay Paul. So excreting a lot of cortisol over a long period of time. And for many women, that will manifest in fatigue, hormone imbalances, thyroid issues. We know that elevated glucocorticoid levels, so cortisol, over long periods of time can actually cause thymocytes, so our thymus gland, which regulates our immune system. It can cause the malfunction or the death of some of those cells. So, and that's a huge play for women with autoimmunity.
Yeah, totally.
Stress and autoimmunity and the link there. And that was a huge piece for so many of my women. And then, looking at why does autoimmunity increase in a lot of women after the age of 30, thinking about that thymus gland will involute around that age for women. And so our thymus peptides, and this kind of bridges into the peptide conversation, we have thymosin alpha and thymosin beta, which are two thymus peptides. There's a lot of research that has been done on those in Russia and Germany since about the 1970s, 80s, about what those peptides do, how they regulate our immune system. And so we can find that when that thymus gland involutes, that may be one of the contributing reasons as to why autoimmunity will rise in women after about the age of 30, we see Hashimoto's and RA, different conditions increase. So yeah, any way that we can help support a woman who's going through a period of chronic stress, to help her kind of downregulate, put her more in that parasympathetic state, that rest and digest, versus that chronic hamster on the wheel, go, go, go. And that's a huge piece, thinking about protecting against autoimmunity, protecting against other hormone imbalances down the road.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And do you think that, if we're talking about from the COVID perspective, stress has been a whole different level for people since March, and it's, people are continuing. It's not like it's a different form as we're adapting, right? Because as humans, we can adapt, which is great for us. But do you think, or have you seen an actual shift in the stress patterns over the past couple months with your patients?
Oh yeah, yes, definitely. The one thing that I have noticed a lot too is changes in my women who are still menstruating, changes in their cycle. Yes. Almost, I'd say a lot of the women that I'm talked to, and we're talking about what their periods are like, it's things have shifted. Probably, yeah, due to chronic stress generally. Sometimes there's other things that are going on for them, but yeah. And then, what are all the things that we can do just lifestyle wise to help women right now during COVID with maybe a little bit more stress? The kids are at home, you're trying to run your business, still do work, that kind of thing. What are some of the things that we can do to support that the nervous system and help reduce cortisol production? And a lot of things that I like to recommend are, I use a lot of adaptogens. So specific ones based on, we can test the cortisol curve and see what their circadian rhythm, what's happening with their sleep-wake cycles. When are they producing cortisol? When do they need to be producing more? Maybe they're not producing enough. And use very targeted botanicals called adaptogens, and adaptogens just help the body to adapt to stress. And so ashwagandha is an amazing one. They call that the life bread of medical school. We calm your cortisol down a little bit.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So I love using adaptogens. I love encouraging women to, incorporate red light therapy, incorporate even like ending your showers in cold. That's a really simple way. Sort of cold exposure can really bring the central nervous system back down. Sympathetic massage is phenomenal. Taking an Epsom salt bath for 20 minutes, acupuncture, any sort of massage will really bring the body back to parasympathetic as well. Meditation, all of these things that we can do, just being outside and putting your feet in the ground.
Yeah.
Just kind of resetting the body.
Yeah.
All free.
Great.
Free.
What's that? I'm sorry.
So many of the things that we can do to bring our nervous system back down are free.
Oh yeah, totally free. Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, and outside has been such a, for me personally, has been such a, I mean, I love being outdoors, but even like, especially during this kind of strange time, it's been like my refuge, like, oh my gosh, I gotta get out and go for a hike or just be with the trees or whatever, because just to try to reset the brain and just get out of that kind of, like you were saying, that sympathetic fear mode, which a lot of people have been in when you're going out in public or anything like that, or watching any media.
Yeah, anything we can do to kind of reset the body in a healthy way in regards to cortisol.
Yeah, great. And okay, so I think we touched about those. I was going to ask you about your recommendations. So that's perfect. You answered them anyway. And you mentioned a little bit about the Dutch test. Could you talk about that for our listeners? First of all, what is a Dutch test? And then two, when should someone get a Dutch test done? And then the third thing is like, which I always think is important in regard to the Dutch test, is should you seek out a practitioner to go over the results of the Dutch test? Because it's a little bit of a complicated test.
Wonderful. I'm so glad you asked all that. So the Dutch test is a dried urine hormone test. It can be done from home. It's 4 samples, 5 if you wake up in the middle of the night, and it's essentially, you will you'll send in these samples to dry. It's a urine test, and then what we can get from that test versus a blood test is so much more information. So we can find out all of the metabolites. So we have our hormones, and then they break down in the body to specific metabolites. So we can find out about different forms of testosterone that can lead to more hair thinning and more acne. We can really isolate that on the test. We can also look at how the liver is detoxing estrogen, which is so valuable that we can't get through a blood test. And that's one of the reasons why I love the Dutch test, especially in my menopausal woman, is to get that information. So what's happening with our estrogen metabolism? We can actually look at mood. So we can look at dopamine, breakdown products. We can look at epinephrine and norepinephrine, and what's happening with some of those neurotransmitters. So it's a little bit of organic acid testing on there. And then we can look at COMT and what's happening with their methylation cycle. So a lot of my women that have depression, that's really valuable information, because if they're not methylating well, we need to fix that. So, or support their methylation, methyl donors. So that's really valuable. And a lot of women with hormone imbalances will have mood things as well. So anxiety or depression, super common. Or sleep issues. And so we can really test not only what's going on with sleep, but with mood, with all of their hormones. The only hormone piece that it doesn't really test is thyroid. So we just run that separately.
Right.
But it's just, for the price, the time, it can be done from home. It's the most valuable test that will give you a lot of information to make decisions for a treatment plan for a woman, looking at what's going on with the hormones and sleep.
Yeah, that's great. And it also tests the cortisol levels too. So it's that gut has that stress component that you were talking about, which is so important when we're looking at how the mitochondria are functioning.
Absolutely. And melatonin too. So we can see really, really low melatonin levels in women. And then when do you take the test? So day, usually 19 through 22 is what I recommend. And during the cycle, so day 1 is day 1 of your period, the first day that you bleed, and then you count out on a calendar or a period tracker app to that period in time. If a woman is postmenopausal, no periods, a little bit different. And the results, if you look at the actual, I think it's a 17-page report, it looks kind of daunting to the untrained eye. So it is really helpful to walk through that with a practitioner. And then, so much more valuable because you're getting very specific treatment recommendations based on you. It's individualized, which is the most valuable part of it is, when I look at it, I'm giving very specific adaptogens, very specific solutions for that woman based on exactly what her labs show. So we're not guessing based on symptoms. We're looking at symptoms plus labs, and then giving a really clear plan to helping that woman to feel better, sleep better, less severe PMS, whatever her symptoms are.
Oh, great. It was a fabulous explanation and so key. The Dutch test is a complicated test, but as naturopathic physicians, we know how to read it. And I highly follow your recommendations there as seeking out a practitioner. And it's a great test. It gives us lots of information. And like you said, we're not guessing, because when it comes to hormones, you don't want to play the guessing game. That's for sure. I mean, never in general, but especially with hormones. Okay, let's switch gears and talk about peptide therapy, one of the other topics that we wanted to discuss today. So let's talk about what are peptides? You talked a little bit about them, but what are the peptides in general? And then what is peptide therapy?
Great. So I'll give another analogy because I think that's the easy way to help understand what's going on. So the way that I think about peptides are, if you think about a protein, so say I eat a piece of chicken for lunch, and what my body does is it breaks that down to peptides, uh, which is just a chain of amino acids, and then the individual subunit is an amino acid. So you can think about it like a train. So we have those boxcars in the train, which are amino acids, and there's all sorts of different amino acids, L-glycine, glutamine, there's a lot of them. And different combinations of those amino acids send different signals to the body. So the peptide is kind of the middle, it's a strand of amino acids connected. It's a signaling molecule based on the combination of those amino acids. And so the way that I love to use peptide therapy with women is signaling certain pathways, certain things that we want to happen in the body. And it fits into the category of natural medicine because it helps the body to do better at what it knows how to do, but maybe forgot or hasn't been getting the signal to do.
Right.
So yeah, it's very different than injecting exogenous testosterone, and that impacts our normal production, or injecting exogenous or outside growth hormone that will regular natural production and cause a lot of side effects. So peptides, because they work with the body, they signal the body to do its normal healthy function. The side effect profile is really low for many of these peptides. And so there's different ways to take peptides. We can inject them. Some of them we apply topically, like our GHKCU, our copper peptides, which help with collagen synthesis. That's the one, when a lot of people hear about peptides, you probably think about the skin creams that have the copper peptides. Or their collagen peptides that they might take as a supplement. And that's kind of where a lot of people have heard about the word peptide. And this is a different type of peptide. It's a similar idea. The peptides are signaling molecules. That's why everything that we eat is actually a message. Food is medicine because it messages, it signals the body to do certain breakdown or to build. And so, but a lot of our peptides are actually injectable form. And some of the ones that I love to use for women's health, and there's some that are really good for gut health as well, that I've seen amazing results. But for autoimmunity in women, I've seen amazing results with an injectable peptide called thymosin alpha. So we talked about the thymus peptides, thymosin alpha and thymosin beta. And that thymosin alpha peptide can really help to the way I describe it is to kind of reset the immune system. And there is research to show that a lot of autoimmune conditions, people with autoimmune pathology, that they do have low levels of this thymosin alpha peptide. And so boosting that and sending a signal to the body to make more of its own peptide production in the thymus can help re-regulate the immune system in a woman with autoimmunity. And I've seen that phenomenally work in some women with multiple autoimmune conditions. Usually we pair that with other things like LDN. I love, adding in multiple things, and then there's lifestyle pieces as well. But the peptides are really a beautiful add-in to a treatment plan to support a woman in helping her body to signal properly. Some other ones that I love to use, there's a couple. There's some that improve growth hormone levels, some natural growth hormone levels, and I like to give that in a combination, 2 peptides. One helps the body to produce more naturally in the pituitary of growth hormone, and one kind of helps shuttle it out to the body for use. And so we call those growth hormone analog peptides. And for women, that could be a game changer if they're not sleeping well.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with those two peptides?
Yeah, and it's, can you talk about where, what is human growth hormone for our listeners? And then also you mentioned, just to backtrack for a second, is you said LDN, and just to describe that, the low dose naltrexone for listeners as well. And we have so many terms we use as practitioners. We're like, oh wait, what was that one? So yeah, if you could talk about those two, that would be great.
Yes, we have our own language.
I know, totally. Secret language, but not secret.
Let's talk about LDN, low-dose naltrexone. So naltrexone was used in a higher dose, in about a 50 milligram dose. In the last 50 years, we used it for addiction and depression things. But what we found is when we dose it in small amounts, about 1.5, 0.5 milligrams, all the way up to about 4.5 milligrams, so really low dose, it can help with producing more endorphins in the brain. The body adapts, it essentially blocks the receptors while you're sleeping at night. And the body adapts and says, hey, let's make more of this. So it does work on a signaling type pathway as well. And endorphins, we've shown that in a lot of chronic pain syndromes, fibromyalgia, that there is a substantial decrease in the amount of endorphins that are produced. So by giving something like LDN, we can help the body produce more of those endorphins that help with pain.
Great. Yeah, I've seen it.
And so,
sorry, go ahead.
yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, with MS patients, I've seen it be really helpful.
Yes. Yeah. And there's so many uses for it now, because in women's health specifically, so looking at autoimmunity with MS, looking at even PCOS potentially has an autoimmune component to it, so LDN there, and PCOS is rampant. I have so many women with PCOS in my practice, so looking at novel therapies that women can use that maybe their conventional doctor wouldn't know about or hasn't thought about or used or seen success with, and LDN is one of those that can be really helpful for some women. So that's low-dose naltrexone.
Great, thank you.
And then what was the other one?
Oh, human growth hormone. Yeah.
Growth hormone. So we have a lot of growth hormone when we're young, when we're a teenager, so about 15, 18, 19, 20, we have a good healthy amount of growth hormone, and we can test these levels. We can look at IGF-1 levels in the blood test, and essentially as we age, our growth hormone levels drop, which is partly one of the reasons among many that we age faster. So this hormone is a repair hormone. It's repairing our muscle tissue. It's keeping us youthful. It's probably the reason why you could stay up all night when you're 16 and the next day. Can't do that anymore.
now that you had your birthday yesterday.
Can't do that anymore. Don't do that anymore. But it's really that repair hormone. And we have growth hormone receptors all over the body. So we have them in the gut, we have them in the muscle tissue, we have them in the brain. We really have them all over in the body. Every tissue has growth hormone receptors. So when we give a peptide that signals the brain to produce more naturally, what we end up doing is boosting that production. And we produce growth hormone about every 3 to 4 hours in the day. We have different pulsations, but the biggest pulsation happens about midnight, 1 a.m. when we're asleep. And we also have to be fasted to produce that growth hormone. So we give this peptide at night, fasted, before bed, 2 hours after a meal. And what we do is we supercharge that growth hormone boost while they're sleeping.
That totally makes sense.
And what that does is it promotes deep recovery, repair, skin repair, gut repair, muscle repair if you're training hard. And I've seen, I have some cool stories about these peptides. One, I've seen somebody who had a Oura ring tracker, and they had they can never get their deep sleep above 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And using this peptide, they got it up to 2 hours a night.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, and the Aura ring is the ring that you put around your fingers for our listeners, and it can track your sleep. And I've seen a lot of really great use with it for patients who are really trying to dial in what specifically is happening for their cortisol levels. Like, it's a different, way to see the cortisol, because it's not really testing cortisol, but we can see, for instance, like you wake up at a specific time of night. 2:00 is really common. Like, oh, I wake up at 2:00 and I can't go back to sleep. I'm like, it's probably your cortisol. So patients really like to use the Aura ring because they can wear it all the time for that tracker.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for explaining that. Yeah. That not everybody's heard about the Aura,
Mm-hmm.
but that can be really helpful when
Mm-hmm.
starting protocol to see what's really happening with your sleep and physiology. How are you repairing and recovering?
Mm-hmm.
And so I've seen some amazing changes in sleep, and that deep sleep is where our hormone regulation happens.
Mm-hmm.
So for men, boosts their testosterone. For women, it can also promote hormone regulation. Natural production of hormones improves when we get more deep sleep. Right. So we need REM, but deep sleep is actually really, really valuable for us too.
Yeah, and it's amazing how the body, when we, so many things are tied to sleep. I had a patient who recently said she hadn't slept over 4 hours in 5 years. So I was like, okay, so you're probably not, feeling that great. So we did some switches, of course. And it was like within a week, she was sleeping through the night. And I was just like, she was like a new person, so sleep affects every system of our body so tremendously. So sleep is key, you guys.
Mood is the biggest change that I think a lot of people will notice with deeper sleep.
Mm-hmm. Waking up happy, what would that be like?
All right. And then the focus. So I've had some medical students, law students, people who are studying for big exams use this peptide and say, my cognitive performance is better because I'm getting that deep sleep. And that's when all of our memories and our thoughts and everything that we're looking at throughout the day is kind of filed away in certain places in the brain. So it can really help with cognitive function as well.
Mm-hmm.
Hormone receptors all over the body. So I've used it in, some athletes or former pro athletes that have noticed dramatic changes in their ability to increase their weight at the gym, the amount that they can lift in a shorter period of time, because it does help with building that lean muscle mass and increasing BMR. And, our muscle and our bone is like our life force as we age.
Mm-hmm.
Especially for women, it becomes harder to build that muscle the older we get.
Right.
Yeah. And so these two peptides, the growth hormone analog peptides, they're also shown to be osteogenic. So they protect bone tissue, which is so valuable for women as they age. Protects muscle tissue, helps you build lean muscle mass through that natural production of growth hormone, which for women, those two are very, very, very important as we age.
Yeah, so key.
Yeah. So that's just one of the peptides that I love to use that can really be a game changer for many women who are not sleeping, they're not waking rested or recovered. Those peptides also help mitochondrial function, improving energy levels as well. So, and there's really the world of peptide therapy. I'm trained by A4M in peptide therapy, but it really is such a growing field. Not a lot of doctors even know much about it, and patients as well. And I think there's some more curiosity. There's more places being used effectively in gut health, in IBD and IBS cases. I've seen amazing results there as well with some of the peptide therapy. So it's really, this will just be a primer because we could go hours on all of the different peptides.
Totally. To backtrack on one thing you were talking about, can you talk a little bit more about the topical use of the peptides in relationship to anti-aging and skin health, which, you know, as women, we're always working or helping our skin to maintain its, you know, youthful appearance.
Yes. So there's really one peptide. One of the, you know, lot of women will do some sort of skin procedure, and you can apply these after that to really help skin synthesis or
Mm-hmm.
production of synthesis after something like a PRP facial
Oh,
or any sort
okay.
of
Mm-hmm.
procedure. You can use it after that, but you could also just use it just for general health at night, just applying to your skin to help with collagen production. So GHKCU, the GHK stands for 3 peptides that are combined to a copper molecule. And I mean, the copper is really one of those essential micronutrients that we need to make collagen in the skin. And so the 3 peptides, or the 3 amino acids, excuse me,
Mm-hmm.
that make up this peptide, they kind of signal the cell. They're the message, and then the copper is just attached to really help the process of
Mm-hmm.
collagen synthesis. And so we have what we call the Botox-like peptides, and this is the GHB and the lufazole and arginine. And, you know, the other two really help with blood flow, also collagen synthesis, but that's a topical that can be applied, and it works through cellular signaling to help kind of wake up the synthesis of collagen in the skin again.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be done very successfully after any sort of skin damage, uh, whether that be from the sun or from an aesthetic procedure. You can use it after that
Mm-hmm.
and really help repair the skin. Or you can use it on scars too, because when you do get a scar, there's collagen, but it needs to be cross-linked appropriately to help the scar heal.
Right, for the healing. Oh, that's so great. You know, there's so many different aspects of the peptides, which I love that you talked about today, and how the communication is so key. Because
Yes.
when the communication is turned off, that, or the cell is turned off, it's like, you know, we need to come back in and figure out a way to turn it on, and all the different levels of communication, just like our radio station is like turned down a little bit. So we're gonna, okay, turn to 101. Okay, great, now you got this peptide talking. Turn to 102. And now you got this one. And our brain has so many levels of communication, and I really liked how you talked about sleep and the aspect of our body having that recovery phase, and so important for hormone production, which, you know, a lot of people don't think about all the aspects that happen during sleep.
Yeah, that is, you know, for you and I both, as you mentioned, improving sleep alone is one of the biggest outcomes. I mean, someone is going to feel better just from that one intervention alone. Improve their
Mm-hmm.
sleep, everything else improves, hormones, mood. Yeah. So
Yeah, and can peptides be helpful for stress? So you, when we're talking about from that cortisol perspective, I know you mentioned that, but, you know, are there specific peptides that can be useful for reducing stress?
that's a great question. So the the growth hormone analog peptides, so those the biochemical name CJC 1295, the GHRP, and then ipamorelin, so that combo is kind of what we were talking
Mm-hmm.
about, using growth hormone. They do help with, so they help with deep sleep, which helps with the response to stress. So
Mm-hmm.
if maybe you've noticed this for yourself, or you know, on patients, where if you don't sleep enough, you're more prone to feeling stressed during the day. If you're
Right,
not,
totally.
right, because the adrenals are also repairing and recovering as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so while we're sleeping. And so really improving sleep. And it's not about, we're not trying to make patients sleep longer, but what the peptides do is it can make sleep more efficient.
Yeah, more
So
quality of sleep.
yeah, deeper quality, which, you know, could be sleeping 7.5 hours and getting an hour and a half or two of deep sleep and waking up refreshed.
Mm-hmm.
And just improving the sleep is going to help with reducing the stress during the day as well. We just know that, you know, your body will blood sugar regulation is off. If we don't sleep enough, cortisol is just all over the place. So that's a huge intervention, just improving the sleep. I think I'm trying to think about other peptides that we use just for stress. There are mitochondrial peptides that help with supporting mitochondrial function.
Mm-hmm.
So those can really help because we know that the cortisol is made in the mitochondria. So,
Right. Oh yeah, that's okay. Back to our little powerhouses.
yes, yeah. So some of the names of those peptides are 5-amino-1-MQ, which is a capsule form that essentially it works in the NAD salvage pathway. So we increase NAD levels. NAD is nicotinamide dinucleotide. It's that molecule that fuels the mitochondria to produce energy. Decreases as we age, NAD. So we can use a peptide like that to really help with NAD production, help with mitochondria. We can use something called MOTS-C, and that's been found, that peptide is actually naturally found in our body, and it's found in higher concentrations in centurions in Japan. It's linked to longevity and lifespan.
Wow.
And we can actually inject that peptide and increase the levels in the mitochondria in the cell, promoting energy levels and also promoting longevity from a mitochondrial standpoint.
So key.
So key. Yeah. And then there's another peptide called SS31. It's brand new. It's really actually pretty expensive to dose. It's an injection. But to take a therapeutic dose from what they've researched in the literature is just not feasible for most people. So that's another one. But I love using NAD patches, NAD intranasal to help boost mitochondria. And when we boost mitochondria, we improve our production of cortisol in a healthy way.
Right. Oh, great. Key. Yeah, I loved it. We'll have to have another talk just to talk about NAD.
That's a whole nother,
well, yeah, because you do NAD therapy. Do you do the IV NAD?
I do. Yeah. And I've been using the patches more often because I find that people can get just a pretty tremendous benefit from doing that. They can do it from home. It's transdermal absorption it's a very specific patented way that they've allowed it to be absorbed into the skin, because if you apply NAD solution, just try and rub it in, it will not absorb. So they use iontophoresis to help it absorb really well. And yeah, that, the price point is substantially less than an IV. It's less time consuming. You don't get the side effect profile that you would get from an IV. So there's a lot of other options for getting NAD.
Great, good. Yeah. So let's wrap up things today. Could you recommend, so we're talking about stress. Stress was kind of one of our big topics today, and based on cortisol and hormone levels, what would be like your top 5 recommendations of lifestyle changes? I know you talked about a little bit of those in relationship to cortisol and stress, some things you could do for that, but I'm talking about specifically that self-care in the COVID time. As what are your top 5, these are your go-tos to help support you over the next, moving into the holidays, as things can be a little bit more stressful for family members, and, being away from family members that they're really familiar with spending time. And just some of those ideas would be great for the listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we think about dealing with stress effectively and how sleep plays a role in that, reducing that blue light exposure at night, we kind of talked about that with melatonin levels, so that you do get into that restful deep sleep. Really that period before bed, an hour before bed, I like to have my patients set an alarm before bed, about an hour before they want to go to bed. That's your, put your phone on airplane, turn off your phone, turn off your MacBook, whatever it may be, the TV, and, make a hot cup of tea or prepare everything you need for the next day. Just kind of that wind down period. Read a book, light a candle, just something to nourish yourself. Is really supportive. And then, so getting in that deep restful sleep at night is phenomenal. And then in the morning, thinking about how we can start our morning to support our body, to not, a lot of times we can get up and just go and look at our phone and drink a cup of coffee and just be in this rush state.
Right. Go, go, go.
What are ways that we can wake up, be proactive, help support our body's stress response before it spikes and we get into that kind of hamster wheel scenario of cortisol production? And so that might look like taking adaptogens in the morning, taking some of those B vitamins to support energy and neurotransmitter production, depending on what their labs or what's going on with them specifically. And then getting immediate light exposure into the pupils in the morning, just to reset that circadian rhythm. Let's wake the brain up and say, hey, it's morning, it's daylight. Get out of bed, doing some movement, stretching. I love doing either a 10 or 15 minute little visualization or meditation. The one that I use, it's on YouTube, it's Tony Robbins' 15 minutes of priming.
Nice, great. Mm-hmm.
And it's really beautiful. Just leads you through gratitude and sending love out to so many of the people that are family or friends or strangers. And it's just, you can't have a bad day after doing something like that. And then, really thinking about other ways that we can modulate stress. So the self-care component. One of the biggest pieces of medicine for me that's preventative is getting massage. And because I know what that does to the nervous system, it kind of just brings you back down to parasympathetic, and it releases that muscle tension that we get from forward posture.
The computer neck.
Which is a real struggle. So doing things to help bring the body back to parasympathetic, connecting. That's been such a challenge, being socially distanced, but still keeping those connections with people. Connecting to self, I think, is, in this time, it's just such a reminder that we can connect to where we can, we get this monkey mind during the day, and we neglect to become the third party to observe the thoughts. And so I think that during COVID, when we've had more isolation and more alone time, that can be used to be valuable, to reflect and to kind of, come outside of ourselves and analyze what's going through my head all day long and how can I support myself better. And I think that's really paramount. That's been a lesson for me as well.
Yeah. Oh, those are great tips, Dr. Amber. I really enjoyed all those different aspects that you talked about. Like you were talking about together with earlier, the 3-stool. Now it's like more like the pyramid with all the different points. And then the top of the one is like the meditation, where you're connecting to, your higher self and really start having that self-care piece to turn off the monkey mind, as you said, is so important, because it allows us to, let our thoughts, I don't know, die down, I guess is a good word, but, kind of just ripple out. And so we can connect more inward.
Yes. Said. Beautiful.
One last fun question. If you had an unlimited budget, what would you do to have the biggest impact on the planet and the welfare of the planet?
Wow. Oh my gosh. I have always wanted to have, and I think that this is a dream in the heart of so many healers, is to have like a space where people can just come as a retreat, where you have, sauna, and you have red light therapy, you have IV therapy, and you have massage therapy, and you have a chef who cooks these amazing healthy meals with a lot of plant-based foods, and just our amazing healing environment that people could experience, just go to get away and go parasympathetic for a couple days.
I love that. Yeah, it should be the parasympathetic retreat.
That would be phenomenal. I would sign up for that myself.
Yeah, I'll give you all the money in the world to build that, because I'm coming. Okay, so Dr. Amber, you also talked about, or let me know that you have a great free PDF or ebook on your website. And can you just mention that for our listeners so they can find out more about peptides?
Absolutely. Yeah. So a lot of times working with a practitioner is the best way to really get acquainted with peptides and that, prescription wise, but there are ways that you can utilize a lot of the concepts that we talked about today in regards to peptides and cellular signaling, things you can do from home. And so peptideplaybook.com is where the information on that is, and it just talks about what are all of the peptides that can be used from home, or things that you can use in food to help your body for repair and recovery and deep sleep.
Oh, great. And your website is Dr. Amber in as in Nancy D as in dog.com, right?
You got it.
Okay, perfect. And then also people can follow you on Facebook and Instagram. It's the same thing, the Dr. Amber ND.
You got it. Yep, they can find me
Yay.
there. It's a lot about mitochondria and peptides on both of those platforms.
Oh, great. And then to make an appointment with you for your wonderful care, you're seeing patients in person or just in telemedicine now?
Both.
Both. Oh, great. And that's from your website. They can find that as well?
Correct. Yes. So they can find that at the drambernd.com. They can book an appointment there.
Oh, great. Thanks, Dr. Amber. It's been such a joy to have you on the Genetic Genius today. And I look forward to connecting more. I see a book in your future, so that will be fun to talk about that. Okay, thanks so much and have a great day. Okay, let's see.